Okay. Check. All right, let's start. So hello everyone, good morning and good evening wherever you are. I'm Sudhir Gopalam and I'm part of the customer engineering team at Google. Welcome to our live webinar featuring Marsh McLennan's customer story. I'm joined here by Ed and Jason from Marsh McLennan, very dear friends and colleagues from MMC, whom I had the pleasure working with for the last 9 months on all things APIs and Apigee. In this session, they will share their experience rolling out Apigee Hybrid, as well as their best practices and lessons learned to move towards their North Star goal of streamlining API operations to go from ideation to production in 5 days. For the audience, please feel free to use the chat to ask your questions. I will either go over them during the session or I'll find some time in the end to go over them. With that, I would pass on to Ed and Jason. Ed, I'm going to move the slides and please let me know how you want me to, where do I pause, okay? So again, okay. I think here. All right, go ahead, Ed.
Okay, so hi, I'm Ed Olson-Morgan. Been in different parts of engineering for the last 20 years, bunch of time in consulting in the middle. Started my career with Marsh McLennan back in 2005, did everything from the business side of our operations through to some customer-facing engineering. And now I've been our core API and innovation lead since 2021. And when I'm not doing that, I'm with the 3 kids over on the right, sort of dealing with the fun and games of being a dad every day. Next, today. So some of you may be familiar with Marsh McLennan, but if you're not, we're a big global professional services firm. Marsh, which is sort of our largest business line, is insurance broking. We do reinsurance broking through Guy Carpenter, human resources and benefits consulting through Mercer, and management consulting through Oliver Wyman. We've been around for about 150 years, and we're about $20 billion in revenue. And myself and Jason are both part of MMC Tech, and MMC Tech is our central technology capability. That was established back in 2020, and our goal is to basically accelerate and standardize adoption of technology throughout the business. So Sudhir mentioned at the start, and the title of this talk is around going from idea to production in 5 days. That's what MMC Tech is all about, is how do we harness all of the technology capabilities across Marsh McLennan to let us do things much, much faster for our businesses and for our customers. So what are some of the challenges we face to get there? We're a global business. We're in 140 different countries. We're in multiple regulated industries in some, if not all of those countries. And that means we've got different regulatory challenges and requirements to meet. We've got to think about how we operate different parts of our business in isolation from each other. And how, one of the reasons we need to have central capabilities and standard is otherwise we'll just get overwhelmed by that complexity. We have to be able to do standard things in lots of places rather than lots of different things in lots of different places. We're not just insurance. I think we're the world's largest insurance broker, but we actually play in a lot of other markets as well. And that means the technical requests and demands and capabilities of those markets are pretty different. And because of the fact that really we've only been bringing technology together for the last few years, we've got a really diverse set of things out there. Whether it's infrastructure, on-premise, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, languages, .NET, Java, JavaScript, TypeScript. And frankly, even when you look at our Apigee Classic estate that sort of predated Apigee Hybrid, there's 2 main and 1 minor way of working even on that technology. So even the same things we weren't quite doing in the same way. Okay. And so why APIs and why doing things API first? And if we're going to be in 140 countries, in multiple major business lines in those countries, we've got to reuse things. And, as software engineers, reuse comes in a whole bunch of different forms. You start off with code snippets. You go out and Google something, often pick it up off Stack Overflow, and that's just a piece of code, a piece of text that you can drop into your application. Now, you can do anything you want with that. Use it, not use it, delete bits of it, play around with it, change it. But once you do that, all of the responsibility as a developer is then, this is my problem. Is it obsolete? Is it insecure? Are any components it's calling on being maintained? All of that's now your problem. And as you move through using templates, maybe within your organization or ones that are being used more broadly, through to software libraries that are available either commercially or through the open source community, all the way through to APIs, more and more of those problems are taken away from you. So by the time you get to APIs, you're not even worrying about the infrastructure that that's running on. You're just worrying about the service, the contract, making the right calls to use it. As a developer, though, we're taking away a little bit of flexibility from you the further we go to the right. We're basically saying, an API can do what an API can do, and if you wanted to do something different, that's a different conversation from if you've got the whole code base open in front of you. And so one of the things that's really important to us as we think about API first is how do we make sure that from an API perspective, we're able to help people who maybe need an extra 5%, who need new requirements in our APIs, how we can do that quickly so that they don't have to go and find other solutions. And then the second sort of core piece that we have and why API first is so important to us is for a company that is a professional services company, not a tech company, we actually build a lot of software. We build a lot of software to run the inside of our own business. We build software that's directly used by our clients to help them do various parts of their business. We build software that our clients' employees use, things in the health space or benefit space. So there's a lot of users using it through their employer. And then increasingly, as the world becomes more digital, we're even building things in the B2B2C space so that our clients' clients and our clients' customers are using. And again, all across multiple lines of business, across multiple geographies with multiple requirements. If we can't solve common software engineering challenges, common development challenges once and make that available to people everywhere, that's just too much. We're not going to be able to meet the demands of our business, and they're not going to be able to meet the demands of our customers. So we have to minimize the amount of things that get done twice across our business. And so how does Apigee help us do that? And so the first thing is, and we'll get to the 36 runtimes in a second, but we're talking about doing things once in lots of different places. One management plane, lots and lots of runtimes. And so that's critical for how we think about API services and API management, that we can do it once, we can touch it once, and we can then distribute it out everywhere. The power of what we can do in configuration and sort of the feature depth of Apigee. This is a phrase I use probably once every couple of weeks. Don't worry, we'll clean it up in Apigee. So as we're bringing together multiple customer demands, as we're dealing with legacy services from different businesses, even as we're dealing with, say, emerging capabilities that have rapidly changing underlying APIs, Apigee gives us the ability to just sort of abstract that complexity away from the developer and say, we'll handle that, don't worry about it. Security capabilities, I'll go in depth this a little bit more, but using Apigee as a facade and as a facilitator so that, again, we can give developers as simple as an experience as possible around authentication and authorization. It's doing reuse within the gateway itself. And so actually making sure that where we've got developers building proxies to meet their own needs, they're not solving the same problem twice. And then using Apigee for simplification. So we use callouts a lot to basically take two-step flows, three-step flows. In some cases, two-step flows that then connect into other two or three-step flows, and be able to mask that inside of Apigee, abstract away credentials from developers, and just give developers a consistent experience about how they interact with lots of different APIs and services, even if the back end downstream is much more complex. I was on a webinar a couple of weeks ago where one of the guys from the early Apigee team called it the mullet approach. I think technically it's a backwards mullet because it's sort of party in the front for the developers. It's nice and simple and fun, and all the business is in the back. But that's the analogy was used, and quite like that one. Okay, next to it. I said I'd come back to 36 runtimes. So you see Jason laughing on the other end because I think he's built every single one of these. Effectively, we think about our business, we've got a number of different physical constraints about how we've constructed our application estate. And we're able to meet all of that with Apigee. So the horizontal line through the middle is our internal network versus our DMZ. And we've actually got multiple DMZs, but Apigee lives in sort of a flat area of that DMZ that we call Kubernetes DMZ. We've got geographic separation, so North and South America, Europe, Middle East, Africa, APAC, Asia Pacific. And then we've got production and non-production separations within those as well. And then that's our Apigee clusters. And then we take advantage of, multiple organizations to actually have 3 separate Apigee organizations inside of those clusters. And that's Marsh and Mercer as our 2 largest business units, and also as our 2 largest legacy Apigee consumers. They have their own organizations. And then we have sort of an MMC strategic organization, which is where we're really looking at for new build, as long as the rest of our business.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, Ed, as well, is some of the important bits that we certainly have driven through is what I like to really call, I suppose, the complete hands-off approach. So everything is as code, not secrets. Let's get those in vault as good citizens, as we should do. And that is utopia. That's where we're aiming for. That's everything that we, that's how we do things. So challenging, but also impressive as well. So.
Yeah, and so from a development, being able to ask for one thing and knowing it's going to be replicated reliably 36 times is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Underneath each of those clusters, we've then got a broad array of targets. Again, our utopia, or our future world, is Kubernetes, Docker, containerized applications. And so there is a parallel container for that, where we're doing a bunch of our sort of new build and modern application work. But there's also, that little server block covers a multitude of sins. But we're also pointing to legacy applications on VMs, different, commercial off the shelf, different software as a service for some stuff that's out the cloud. And so the Apigee sort of serves as this place where the new world and the old world meets. And we can expose either one to developers who are building new applications or people who need to consume our services without having to sort of show them, the spaghetti under the hood sometimes that we've built up over the last many years. Yeah. So we're going to talk in a little bit of depth about some of the capabilities that we've built using Apigee and sort of how they help us, accelerate development and standardize development. So one is we've used sort of a lot of the OAuth capabilities of Apigee and then expanded them ourselves to build something we called the Access Management API. And the goal there is basically to say, as a developer, you shouldn't have to, in general, we need you to understand what OAuth is and kind of how it works. But what we don't need you to understand is how to think about it differently, whether or not it's your tokens originating from machines or originating from humans. And what we don't need you to understand is the complexity of identity providers that we're using to handle both Marsh McLennan internal identities as well as third-party client customer identities. We want to be able to abstract all of that away using Apigee, give a single API service that's configurable for the bits of that your app needs to use, and then we'll handle how to get the bits to talk to each other. So, for example, if you're making a call to an API that returns data, it shouldn't matter if you're making that call from Postman, if you're making that call directly from SharePoint Online, if you're making that call from a custom application, whatever that may be, you should be able to have a valid token for that application, submit it, and the application can handle it. And as a developer, all you've said is, this is my list of valid token originators and issuers. We've got that deployed on all 36 of those Apigee instances that you saw. So we can do the same thing around, DMZ traffic, internal traffic, cross-geographic traffic. We can basically create quite complex identities and configuration to say, this is where we want to take tokens from, and more importantly, this is where we don't. And so we just mask all of that away from the developer. So there.
That's awesome. One sec. Yeah.
And then we built on top of that with a pattern that we call Trusted Broker. And so if you think about that chart with the 36 organizations on it, that big line across the middle, I structured it like that for a reason, because historically we've had, we've got actual firewalls between our internal network and our DMZ, but this was sort of the biggest and tallest of them all. This was sort of the policy barrier that basically said, if you need to build an application out in the DMZ, you can't consume internal services. And so over time, what that led to was a lot of duplication, a lot of complex architectures, some exceptions where things just had to be done that way. And so a couple of years ago, Mike Coe, who was our enterprise technical architect, sort of came to myself and Jason and some of the others and said, we've got all of this Apigee hardware and capability out there. Can we use it to give us a pattern that would allow us to communicate from the DMZ to the internal network? And so, several months of work and trying different things, testing things. What we came up with is this idea of, let's take our pairs of Apigee instances either side of the DMZ internal network line. So, the North America non-production, let's take that pair. And then let's say that we can have a call come into the external version, and we've stood up a new ingress that's hidden away from the internet. We have a call come in there, and then we start using all of the Apigee security policies. I think we're using every one at some point in the flow. We do a whole bunch of checks on the call out in the DMZ. If those checks fail, we reject the call right there. If all of those checks pass, then we have one very narrow firewall port with mutual TLS that connects to a dedicated ingress internally on the internal Apigee. And then we do a whole bunch more checks. If you get through those checks, then your call is allowed to proceed to the internal API, but even at that point, you're still proceeding as if you were another call originating from the internal network. So you've got to go through any checks that API has again. So we may have checked your JOT 5 times on the way through and checked slightly different requirements and parameters as we go through. But fundamentally, this pattern allows us to now register internal APIs on these services, register applications on both the internal and external Apigees to be able to consume them, and then pass all of that through. And so sort of being able to build and wrap a service around Apigee has actually given our developers a ton more capability and our architects the ability to draw things that are quite a lot simpler. And sort of one final thing on detail, I talked a lot about programmable proxies at the start, and the fact that, a lot of time we've got to solve some quite complex geography between different parts of, requests and responses. We use JavaScript and Apigee quite a lot. And one of the things that we've sort of landed on pretty early is if that's where our most complex logic is, that's probably where we've got to test it. And so we messed around for a little while. I'm sure I've seen other people do versions of this pattern as well. But if you're not doing this today and would like to, fundamentally, we use a thing called Rewire, which is sort of an older JavaScript framework, to pull all of the functions out of Apigee.js files. We mock out Apigee context and sort of import that and bring it. And then you can create a whole bunch of test scenarios. We use Jest as our testing framework. At this point, you can use anything that runs in JavaScript and profit. At this point, we actually know for all of these scenarios of request response combinations for the different things that we're going to see coming into this JavaScript, we can be confident that that's going to work, build that into CI/CD, and therefore catch things even before we get to integration tests and non-production to make sure that we're going to get the complex logic to work about what we want. Okay.
Anything else? Okay, let's move on. Okay. One sec. I think this is, again, thank you, Ed and Jason, for this these insights. I think I'm sure everyone in the audience will find the learnings that you have and the information you shared very insightful. What I've done is I've taken a few questions that we got from the audience prior to the session. I'll go over them now. We do have a list of live sessions are coming in. I'll probably bring them at the end if time permits. So let's move on and get to those questions. The first question is, managing the lifecycle of a large volume of APIs can be challenging. What are some of the challenges you have encountered and how did you overcome them? Ed, Marsh, Ed, or Jason, anyone?
I'll maybe offer a couple of thoughts to start with, and then Jason jump in, especially if you disagree. So, I mean, I think this is one of the challenges we've seen, throughout our time sort of working with Apigee is that there's a trade-off that you have to manage, and that trade-off is between letting developers come in and very quickly solve problems, experiment, learn about the platform, and build things, through to, by the time we get to production, how do we have a pretty concise, curated set of APIs and then know what's going on with them all over the place? And so, James will with that a little bit later. But what we've really found is this is a little bit about how we structure our Apigee organizations, how we structure different environments within them, and then how we bring APIs into pipelines. And so we've got, again, still multiple. We haven't got to one single version of the truth yet, but basically controlling all of the interactions with Apigee through CI/CD, increasingly through infrastructure as code that powers that, so that we can basically have a declarative state of what's going on inside of Apigee. We see what's going on there, and we can then, again, run testing against that, making sure that we're consistent in all the areas we need to be consistent. So I think that's one of the main things we've done. Jason?
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot with there, Ed. I think, there definitely was some challenges of, how things are done today and how we overcome those. And I think you touched on some of them, environment groups, permissioning, RBAC, and I think we'll probably touch on some of that later. But it's changing people's mindsets, isn't it, of, how they used to do things and trying to align them, and best practices, absolutely makes sense, and getting some value from that. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. I'll move to the next question. APIs are mission critical. How did you ensure that your platform operates smoothly and handles disruptions?
Yeah,
I know, Jason, it's a very
how long is this? So it's lots of different things. I mean, I'll try and talk through some of it. It requires a combination of best practices, in both design, deployment, monitoring, and incident management, and many more. We'll try and sort of step into some of those. So architecture and design, to start with, we have multi-region deployment, as you've seen in the previous slides. That is 24 clusters across 3 regions, NATO and APAC. As I've touched on as well, this is 36 Apigee organizations, which is a lot. Yeah? And that is obviously adopting the multi-org approach within Apigee Hybrid that we have. One of the things that we did in the last quarter was move to improve the redundancy. So we moved to an active state, which is a significant piece of work. However, the benefits are sort of exponential, in terms of that core redundancy in the platform across the board. Again, all done by automation. I can't stress that enough. I mean, I'm a big advocate of automation, and that, that classic one-liner, that hands off, people shouldn't be touching things, everything should be as code, excluding secrets. Let's get those into Vault, some sort of Vault mechanism. And that is utopia. That's the right way to do things. It's very easy to fix things on the fly, and you've got to avoid that at all costs, sort of thing. Moving on to, I suppose, some different areas, load balancing and auto scaling. We adopt a global distributed traffic load balancing mechanism throughout the estate, and then take some of the, the native, should we say, features within Anthos and the Apigee Hybrid products. So HPA, which is like horizontal pod autoscaler, and some of the other bells and whistles that come with Anthos to achieve that. The biggest one, as we sort of touched on briefly, is infrastructure provisioning and configuration management. So, as I said, I'm really passionate about that. It's the right way to do things. So we are, obviously leveraging infrastructure as code. We use a combination of different tools, predominantly Terraform and Ansible. There is some design decisions behind why we do that. And that, what does that do for us? Well, that automates the complete provisioning and the management of the infrastructure, and ensures that all of that server configuration is consistent and automatically maintained. There is no other way to do it, really. I suppose moving on to monitoring and alerting, there's a number of different areas I think everyone's involved into in terms of monitoring and alerting. So real-time monitoring. We do have a strategic tool that we use for all our monitoring. So it's important to not just do the real-time monitoring, but threshold-based alerting. We have a lot of that in place. We also adopt an automated self-healing as well. So we have automation which is doing that constantly. And getting more into proprietary stuff of Anthos and Apigee Hybrid are things like the automated health checks and cluster diagnostics that happen. And again, all that's wired into different communication and notification channels as well. We've got visibility of it. And probably the biggest one that you always cycle back to, I suppose, is log analysis. The logs tell you a lot, and sort of weaving through those will give you some real core information that we need. Some of the more basic ones, backup and recovery, that was very important from the start of design. So if we think about underpinning components of Apigee Hybrid, Cassandra, so the database side of things, all that's automated backups into the cloud, and also the core Kubernetes, Anthos clusters themselves are backed up and obviously tested as well to make sure that they're working. I think more common stuff after that is incident management. I mean, we've been around a while in the tech game in MMC. We're not new to it. It's not our first rodeo. So we've got well-defined sort of incident response plans in place and clear roles and responsibilities when those things happen. I'm not going to go into obviously details around that, but so that's already an established process that we can just then hook into, which makes sense. I think one of the biggest things, and certainly from a technical side of things and an engineering point of view, is feedback loops. It's really important. We're sat in engineering, we're developing these things, we're automating it. It's fantastic, brilliant, but you've got to get that feedback from consumers, to identify those sort of potential issues and the areas for improvement. That's significant. So, hence we work quite closely with Ed, and Ed's working with the business as well, and we get that good feedback. Off that, the continuous improvement, we iterate over that feedback to make the improvements. And this is real world usage and real world challenges then that you get in and we can then address in the right way. I suppose a final note I would say on that is that, while technology, I suppose best practices, that plays a crucial role in, to ensure sort of smooth operations. But there's people aspect as well, and that's really important. We're quite fortunate we've got a well-trained, sort of collaborative and proactive team, to make a significant difference on the platform's resilience and ability to handle disruptions. So, yeah, many more, but I think we've only got an hour, so I'll stop there.
No, that's good, Jason. And I think you've been quite humble on talking about your automation. I would like to share this, that very few customers have gone to the level of automation that you have created in MMC, where your biggest concern is, how do I get off sandbox? Because if you're off sandbox, you have automated it so well, the production is not your concern. We have worked with multiple customers who look at sandbox and lower environments as a complete different world, and production is a different world. Very few places we have seen, like you got it running on sandbox, you have almost 100% confidence that it's going to run on production. That
Most
kind
of the time.
in automation,
I
think is really, really, really something we should highlight.
It's really important. And we, as you're well aware today, we worked quite a long time with the products and the early versions, and I think there's been some significant improvements in the products as well. So obviously the different layers, which we've maybe not touched into too much, is obviously the Anthos Kubernetes layer, obviously Apigee then installed into that. And things are changing. I can see some real improvements in where that is going, and that will help us anyway. But yeah, it was important for us at the start. That whole design, phase and automation is key to success.
Awesome, thank you. So, Ed, if you want to add anything, if not, I'll move to the next question. I think.
No, I think maybe two things, but quick ones. One is, I think the high availability. I just can't talk about that enough. This idea of Apigee there is an Apigee organization, and it exists in two clusters, and sort of the down sync to both of them from the management plane, and then the cross sync between them, between the runtimes. Just if we look at that's pretty unique in our development stack, to basically be able to look at something and say it's DR is always configured and DR is almost always up to date, and that to be something that is just handled inside of the combination of the product and the automation work that Jason and team have done is amazing. And the second thing, so you talked about sandbox to non-production to production. It's even more. It feels sometimes a little more granular. Like we put so much work into getting something working in sandbox, and then the very first place we do a non-production test, and after that, sort of because of the automation, we've ironed out so many things there that I think it's probably half the time goes into sandbox, maybe a quarter of the time goes into one of those 24 clusters, two of those 24 clusters, and then the other quarter of the time, suddenly you get this incredibly fast rollout across everything else because it's automated, and because exacting at that level to make sure that it's going to work, that everything would, we chase down a lot of stuff. And we is really Jason and David and the other folks on that team, but they push it back up to me in terms of like how rigorously are we testing this? What, we've even got automated developer test suites now to test when we make an update to Sandbox, so that we make sure that from a development perspective we're seeing everything we would expect to see. And it just means it's just many fewer surprises, and it allows us to move much faster once we've got through that pace.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So moving to the next question. How did you ensure federated access control across different business units operating in different geographies?
I'll talk to the business side of the sort of what we've done at high level, and Jason, the magic is under the hood here.
Yeah.
I mean, from the business side, this is something that I appreciate about working with Apigee and working with Google is, we're not, our source of identity at MMC is Active Directory, right? And even worse, because we're an organization that's been built up by mergers and acquisitions, it's currently 11 Active Directories. That's going to change, but it's 11 Active Directories. And so, we've got, a little bit of and obviously Apigee runs off Google identity, but what we've been able to do, and sort of the power of something like Google IAM in the cloud, and the fact that that is programmable and configurable, is we're able to go from our Active Directory, so our MMC identity, through, we've got Okta in the middle, then Google identity itself, to the point where we can manage people to where we want to manage them in Active Directory. We can do everything as role-based access control. We can have a very high level of granularity of that, because it's all sort of inside the tools and everything with the way that we work every day. And then it can all cascade and work inside of Apigee. And so I think we've still got probably another level of granularity we want to push it to, but we've already got that center. The ability to go, Active Directory to Google identity pretty seamlessly is pretty valuable to us. Jason, you want to talk more about how it actually happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose let's go back a little bit. So again, it's back to when we did the first initial version of Apigee Hybrid and what that product looked like at that point in time. It has evolved since then. So there is now RBAC available. It wasn't when we had it. So we have to design that, and obviously we work very closely with yourself, Ed, and a number of people across multiple teams to try and hone in how best do we do that. And again, it's a complex infrastructure that we have in place just from an identity point of view. So, we're sort of talking about how does that flow look? Active Directory within our organization is huge. It is big. So close discussions with the identity teams to establish the right pattern. It does mean that we do have a lot of Active Directory groups, but again, this was driven by the requirement that we need that separation as you sort of break down the application from the Apigee organizations into the business units, and then roles and personas that you want people to have within that platform. So the flow, very simply, is, as I just touched on, is Active Directory, but we have tools and processes in place where there is essentially self-service, so people can request access into the groups and roles that they want. Again, it's all heavily documented, really good self-service and documentation about how we present this to the business, and then that magic happens behind the scenes. Again, I can't go into too much detail, but essentially there's lots of a synchronization process between Active Directory and then into our core Okta environments, and then from Okta environment is then syncing into GCP, and again, all done by automation. So that's where the power of those tools come into play to make all that work. So when we make changes to groups, it's all automated. There's no finger pressing, anything like that. You can't do that when you're into hundreds and thousands of users and all groups, and have any confidence of how that works, really. So yeah, but we've got that, and I think Ed has already touched on. I think there's more work to do to try and bring more granular RBAC into environments that we have native within Apigee Hybrid. So, yeah, it works. Yeah, it works really well, doesn't it?
Thank you. And I'm sure, and again, the amount of product and engineering feedback that you have given has been really invaluable. So thank you for all the feedback and helping us.
I'm still waiting for the invoice to be paid today. But
yeah, we'll get there. Yep. All right. So next question: what's your strategy for varying compliance requirements like data sovereignty, privacy and security across different regions?
Well, I think we've shown some of that already, which is we sort of, when we architected this, we built it to have that sort of regional separation. And so, we're north, the sort of the regional, the NASA, EMEA, APAC structure at its heart. That's our sort of core way for thinking about that. However, and with this, we've got 35 minutes in and we haven't touched on Apigee X. So, but that's the other part of the strategy. I mean, and more broadly, we're looking at how Apigee X fits in. We have a lot of on-premise things. We are, obviously, as I think every large enterprise is, looking at seeing what's the right balance between on-premise and cloud, and probably that's moving more towards the cloud, over time in the short, medium, long term. And so Apigee X then comes up for us in sort of two ways. One is obviously moving as we move more of our core applications, core functionality into the cloud. That's really where Apigee X shines. But also when we start thinking about, tactical regional deployments. So we've got, what happens when things have to stay in Canada? What happens when things have to stay in India? Well, whatever that may be, and being able to work with use Apigee X in the relevant regions, in the relevant data centers, to sort of keep that localization for us, while coming back to things that are right at the start, one management plane. And so the ability for whatever we are doing with Apigee X and whatever we're doing in a specific region to still have all of the processes and all of the tooling and all of the capabilities that we have in any of our other regions, that just all comes down through the management plane. But we keep the isolation for data, privacy, the applications themselves.
Yeah, there's definitely, there is a lot of synergies between, Apigee Hybrid and Apigee X, and obviously, as you well know, sort of today that we're walking through an Apigee X sort of POC at the moment, and it's going pretty well, sort of thing. But Hybrid is on-prem stuff initially, and Apigee X is for cloud, really. That's where we sit with things at the moment. Yeah.
Awesome, great. Okay, next question. I know this is Ed's favorite question. Security is top of mind for most organizations. What is your approach to comprehensive threat protection for your APIs?
Yeah. So I think there's probably a couple of layers here. The first we've already touched on, which is what we're doing ourselves, and fundamentally that idea is to say, let's move the implementation of as much of sort of the authentication, authorization dance away from developers as we can. Let's sort of make that something that is configurable rather than implemented by developers. Let's leverage the ability of, Apigee and some of the other things that we've done to handle not just authentication in front of the gateway, but actually support, things that are going last mile and further down into the underlying services and microservices. So that's one piece we've already touched on. And then the second piece is we're looking at Apigee API, advanced API security. We've been talking with the team there and sort of evaluating that product. And I think we're interested in insights about that for two reasons. One is sort of the more InfoSec mindset is it gives you more insight into what's going on, right? It really shows you who are those actors who are accessing your APIs, how are they coming across that? And then from my perspective, from sort of an API developer and an API program sort of owner and coordinator, the thing that I'm most excited about is the ability to actually review how well constructed are all of our proxies, be able to put those checks into CI/CD, be able to eventually start as we take advantage of more things like Apigee Sandbox and in VS Code, Apigee Emulator, and basically be able to push that more back to the developer and say, as you're building something, no, you forgot this bit. Put this bit in now before it even makes it into the environments themselves. And being able to audit that, being able to all of that capability allows us just to, I'd rather build secure than know really quickly I've been breached. And so
awesome.
we need both, but I'd rather be on the first side of the fence.
Yeah, that's true. Jason, anything you want to add from a network, from an operation standpoint? Maybe we lost Jason.
He may have frozen.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll move on. Maybe he'll come back and we'll get him. We'll come back to this question again. So next question we have is, how do you plan to scale to the meeting increasing demand while controlling your costs?
I think we've got two pieces here. Is that, I think in the last sort of 2-3 years, what we've been doing is more focused on, to be honest, more focused on capability and increasing the amount of gateway capability that we've got for our enterprise. And so, right now, I think probably our costs will be going up a little bit. Maybe not per unit, but definitely in terms of, the capabilities we're providing and what we're putting on the floor for our development teams to use. Coming back in terms of, how we start controlling costs as we move forward, I think there's a couple of sort of levers we're going to pull. One of which is, again, this sort of, as this movement comes less on-premise, more cloud, moving things into Apigee X, taking advantage of sort of having that fully managed capability. And then the second piece is simplifying our on-premise Apigee estate to take advantage of benefits in the product and advances in the product. I think that 30, as Jason alluded to at the start, that 36 organization structure that we've got, we definitely needed that 2 years ago to do everything we wanted to do. I'm not so sure that we couldn't do it with 12 now, based on all the things that have come out or are coming in the products to meet our sort of glide path there. And so I think that's the other thing we're really going to be looking at is basically, reducing the amount of sort of, fixed infrastructure that we're running on premise to support Apigee, and instead, variabilizing it both through moving to cloud and eventually just sort of, compressing down that Apigee hybrid estate.
Perfect. And Jason, anything you want to add on this? Like, how do you plan to scale?
Through constant monitoring. We sort of touched on it before. It's really important. Fortunately, we do have some really good tools and good metrics to try and manage that. It's really important. And I think, absolutely agree with what I've talked about. There are some other opportunities to maybe refactor the way that we're doing things as well to get the most out of the product at the right cost. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So I think that's my last question. So before I pick up some of the live audience questions, just want to point out a couple of resources that we have. The first one is Apigee Community. This is a place where you can go and find answers for any of your questions. We have people, both Apigee customers as well as people from our product engineering and customer success, responding to those questions. So highly encourage you all to go there. Even if you want to know about more events like this or sessions like that, that's a place where you can get more information on. So please go to that Apigee community, ask your questions. We'll try to get most of the questions in the live session today. If we don't get, we'll put those questions in the community and answer it there. The second one is the feedback. We all are always looking for ways to improve. So give us feedback about the session today, what you like, what you didn't like, and if you want to hear something different or more, let us know, and we will organize a different. We'll organize follow-up sessions. So that is about the resources. Now I'll pick up some questions. Some of them I find them a little interesting. So yeah, this is my favorite so far. What would it take to bring your
I know that'll be over
from 5 days to 3 days?
I mean, there are probably. I mean, I think 5 is our golden path. It's our north star. To be honest, we're hitting it. We're hitting it more and more. But there's where are things? What would it take to? I think it's still a little bit is even more automation, but it's on automation of some of maybe the silly things you would never think about need automating, such as setting up a developer in a DAST tool the moment so that they're able to review it's just little. It's all when you're trying to do things really fast. It's all little things really get you. And I'm trying. We've been doing one sort of recently over the last week, and it was little things like that. It's I've deployed an API, I've run tests against it, security tests against it, but I can't actually get and look at I'm losing time getting into the report to remediate them. So it really is. It's automation everywhere you can put automation. But it's sometimes you can't automate what you don't know you should automate, and so I think it just takes time and going through process over and over again to figure that out. Jason, you.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ed. Automation is the key, isn't it? As we start, as we're getting down to the 5 days, those little things that do factor up and give that time back. And Toby, I'm sure we will be down to 3 days next time we talk to you.
Okay, that's good. All right. So next question I have is, how much did Apigee help you adopt a hybrid cloud environment with your existing on-premises environments?
I think I'd say we're still at the early stages of really proving out. What I'd say Apigee's allowed us to do, what we've really done with Apigee Hybrid today, is allow us to get a massive amount of consistency across our on-premise environment. Right, we've sort of basically got, and because of what we're seeing, Jason talks about the POC as we sort of really start testing out X. But basically, what we're seeing is now that we've got that consistency, moving those patterns into the cloud. So an Apigee paired with Kubernetes, that's the bit that's going to make it easy for us. Is we're effectively talking. We haven't talked at all about the phenomenal work that Jason and a whole bunch of his colleagues have done about making Kubernetes easy to use across different platforms, because we've done that too. But from a developer perspective now, whether Apigee is on premise or in the cloud, whether that Kubernetes cluster is on premise or in the cloud, those are words and configuration rather than actually having to understand the nuances of the underlying platform.
Yeah. The only bit sort of add to that, so I think, what we've learned with Apigee Hybrid, there are some key takeaways that we're maybe trying to adopt in different areas and different platforms as well. So it's definitely been, a good learning experience, should we say, for both parties. I think we brought quite a lot to the table as well, that's feeding and driving the product as well. So.
That's good. Thank you. So I think we have a few more minutes, so I'll probably take 2 more questions. There's almost like an interview question here. What do you wish you knew before setting out your multi-cloud strategy journey?
Ooh. God, how long have we got? Oh wow. Well, I suppose, we talk more about hybrid. Well, I wish I had your mobile number previously today. That would have helped quite a lot. That's a tough one, really. I think working with you guys, I think getting the right support in place is key. Apigee is a complex product anyway. You start putting Anthos in the mix as well, whether that's the different flavors that you can deploy on bare metal. Obviously, we're on-prem VMware. I think getting the right support and engaging you guys to drive that, to start that journey, I think is really important. And trying to get that design right at the start. And documentation, there's lots of documentation. Maybe there's some improvements there that can be taken. But those are a few things I would say. I wish I knew before.
I think it's these journeys are long enough that I think you sort of need to we talk about a journey has a destination somewhere at the end where you're trying to get to. But these journeys are long enough that the nature of that destination is going to be different by the time you get there. And so one of the things that's actually been really valuable is working with Sudhir, working with others like Gear on the project team to actually understand when we get here, where is Apigee going to be? And not asking that far out for ironclad dates of what's going to happen, but understanding this is where the product roadmap is headed, and so therefore, what should we focus on building because we're going to need it when we get there, no matter what. Versus, don't do we're going to need this capability by the time we get to the end of the journey, but it's highly likely Apigee will have it, or the amount of it that we'll have to build will be different by the time we get there. And so, now knowing, I feel like I'm still slightly sort of resetting my map towards the end state as I learn things. This is just multi-cloud in general. Is the more you can know about where you're going and where it's going to be when you get there. There's a Wayne Gretzky quote about you don't skate to where the puck is now, he skates to where it's going to be. And anywhere where you can get the information to figure out where the puck is going to be. And a lot of that is, frankly, asking questions to folks like Sudhir and others at Google, because you'll get good thoughtful answers to help you sort of guide and map out that journey.
Awesome. And I know we are on time. So thank you again, Jason and Ed. This has been really, really insightful. I'm sure everyone here and the audience would find it very insightful and useful. So again, thank you all. I'm going to end the broadcast and see you all. Cheers.
Cheers, guys. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.